Powered by the Montana Television Network. Montana This Morning continues on Montana's News Leader.
The feds are zeroing in on Florida in the search for who sent pipe bombs to prominent Democrats. I'm Laura Podesta. I'll tell you why officials are warning there could be more bombs out there.
Bozeman might be adding more spaces to its parking garage. I'm at Airs Bab, and coming up, I'll let you know just how many spaces it could be.
Good morning to you. Welcome to your Friday. I'm Missy O'Malley with Chet Lehman. It is 6:30 and our top story for you now. Federal investigators are still trying to figure out who sent explosive devices to prominent Democrats and critics of President Trump.
As CBS News' Laura Podesta reports, officials say some of the packages could have come from Florida, are warning there could be more bombs out there as well.
Sources tell CBS News this postal facility in Opelika, Florida, is where some of the suspected package bombs sent to critics of President Trump were processed. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen said yesterday some of the packages originated in Florida. Several prominent Democrats were targeted. 2 packages were sent to former Vice President Joe Biden.
We've got to turn off this hate machine. We got to come together.
All of the packages had a return address of Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
So the last couple of days have been trying for many of us, to say the least. As we know, there will always be those who use distraction, threats, and even violence to accomplish their ends.
None of the devices detonated, and investigators are still trying to determine if they were not meant to go off or were poorly designed.
This is something that should be taken seriously. The NYPD and the FBI, we're taking this seriously. We are treating them as live devices.
In the wake of the discoveries, there's heightened awareness of potential threats. Last night, part of the Time Warner Center in New York City, where CNN is located, was briefly evacuated because of 2 unattended packages. And the bomb squad was called to a building in West Los Angeles where Senator Dianne Feinstein has an office. Both were false alarms, but officials warn more package bombs could still be found. Laura Podesta, CBS News, New York.
Now, Laura tells us the bombs have also raised new questions about the ability of the United States Postal Service and delivery companies to intercept explosives and other dangerous items. Biohazard detection, X-rays, and other technologies have had some notable successes in recent years, but officials warn the sheer volume of mail makes it impossible to catch everything. And that's a sad statement right there.
Scary stuff.
That we're having to even do that is the saddest statement of all.
Scary stuff.
Let's shift gear to something much more pleasant, the weather.
Yes,
It's lovely out this morning.
Wow.
It's gorgeous.
Temperatures this morning basically into that 40 to even 50 degree range.
Yes.
Wow.
We'll take it.
Mainly dealing with an isolated chance of a few showers. The wind's going to pick up this afternoon. That could be an issue for a few areas as we head later into the day. Looks like the weekend's going to be split a bit, at least between rain and dry conditions. We'll talk more about that, of course, coming up, and a look at your Halloween forecast coming up in a few minutes.
Ooh, scary. 6:33 now. We're going to shift to the political scene. Initiative 185, if passed, would extend Montana's Medicaid expansion program, which provides health coverage to nearly 1,000 low-income adults. But polling indicates that passage of I-185 is not a sure thing.
So what happens to Medicaid expansion if the initiative fails or if it passes? MTN's Mike Dennison has our story.
In 2015, a coalition of Democrats and moderate Republicans in the legislature narrowly approved Montana's Medicaid expansion program. But now, most Republicans who were part of that coalition are opposing Initiative 185, which would extend the program past 2019.
My philosophy remains unchanged. I actually think expansion is our moral duty, right? And the problem I have is that 185 doesn't provide the boundaries that I'd like to see on the next generation of expansion.
Republican lawmakers who favored the expansion 3 years ago also insisted on a 2019 expiration date so they could review the program and perhaps make some changes. But core supporters of Medicaid expansion aren't confident that same coalition will exist at the 2019 legislature, so they came up with I-185 asking the voters to extend the program. I-185, however, also raises tobacco taxes to help pay the state cost of Medicaid expansion, and 2 tobacco firms are spending more than $17 million to defeat the measure. GOP supporters of the expansion say if I-185 loses, they'd still argue to extend the program, but make it more restrictive and require hospitals benefiting from the program to help cover the cost. Republican former state Senator Bruce Tutvet of Kalispell voted for Medicaid expansion in 2015, but has appeared on campaign literature opposing I-185.
I would come down and testify for voting for it again with these caveats that there's skin in the game, there's co-pays, there's work requirements, the things that make it a functioning, good program.
Supporters of Medicaid expansion say they're happy to work with the next legislature on tweaking the program, whether the initiative passes or not. But they remain concerned that if I-185 fails, all of Medicaid expansion could be in jeopardy.
What we're not willing to do is fundamentally gut the program, which is what many in the legislature want to do. As we go into the legislative session, we have the extremes in both parties, and we need folks in the middle to get this done. And that middle is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, where we don't have the votes.
So I think we can say no matter what happens with I-185, the fate of Medicaid expansion will still be decided next year in this building behind me. At the Capitol, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
Now, if Medicaid expansion continues, the state is responsible for 10% of the approximate annual cost of $600 million.
Staying on the political scene, as this 2018 campaign enters the home stretch, Montana's Senate race remains front and center. GOP hopeful Matt Rosendale is preparing to host Donald Trump Jr. on a multi-city tour of Montana beginning today. Now, yesterday we showed you Rosendale taking time to cast his ballot in his hometown of Glendive. Thursday, Senator Jon Tester did the same, turning in his ballot in Fort Benton. Our MTN MSU poll shows Senator Tester with a 3-point lead over Rosendale, with 6.5% of those surveyed still undecided. Our poll has a margin of error of plus or minus 2%. Libertarian Rick Breckenridge also running in this year's Senate contest.
And the state Supreme Court has denied an appeal filed by an inmate who walked away from the detention facility in handcuffs and shackles back in 2014. Kevin Anthony Briggs was found in Oregon a few weeks later and then returned to Montana. Briggs was convicted on charges of aggravated assault, assault on a police officer, and sexual assault, along with other charges. In his appeal, Briggs claimed, among other things, that his counsel was ineffective and that he was not granted a speedy trial. The court ruled on Tuesday that Briggs and his attorney failed to prove those charges. Briggs is serving a 35-year sentence at the state prison.
Well, as Bozeman's population inches closer to 50,000, parking in the downtown area can be frustrating. MTN's Medeiros Babb finds out how the city plans to address this issue.
Bozeman's only parking garage is nearly full as lunch rolls around each day during the week. Dave Cash says he parks here because on the street is not an option.
Yeah, I mean, you end up driving around, I come to the parking garage a lot just because it's usually space here, but you try and find on-street parking, it's virtually impossible.
The lack of spots, combined with the fact that Bozeman gains new residents daily, has the city's parking manager looking for new ways to solve this problem.
We're definitely seeing increased capacity issues. We haven't had that many where it was completely full, but especially during the day, say between noon and 2, we experience a pretty heavy load.
This load is why the city has hired an engineering company to weigh the city's needs.
And what we need to do is make sure that we're balancing available parking as well as the cost of that infrastructure to get it in place.
The parking garage holds 435 vehicles. If the study determines that there is a need for more parking, 200 spaces will be added.
I think we have a choice of either get more parking or fewer people, and unfortunately the fewer people isn't an option probably.
The study is expected to take about 2 months and costs a little over $40,000. In Bozeman, Medeiros Babb, MTN News.
Now, Medeiros tells us the study being paid for out of the Downtown Urban Renewal District's work plan.
And the U.S. Geological Survey has issued a new threat ranking for volcanoes in the United States. Now, this is not a list of how likely these volcanoes are to go off. Instead, this is a ranking of how dangerous these volcanoes would be if they do erupt. Now, the Yellowstone caldera is ranked pretty far down on the list at 21st, and that's in the high danger category. Now, this has a threat score of 115. Now, this is a far cry from the threat score of 263 for Kilauea, which is at the top of the list. The next is Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier, both in Washington. Fourth is Reno Volcano in Alaska. The fifth is Mount Shasta in California. Currently, no volcano in the U.S. continental states has any sort of activity alert. Interesting there.
Just the potential damage it would cause if it erupted, not an impending threat of an eruption.
Yes, be clear about that.
That's an important note to put out there.
Yes.
Don't panic, people.
Yes, don't panic.
Yes.
Coming up after a quick break, it's the last of our look at the MTN MSU poll for the election day. Dr. David Parker, Jay Cohn, and our chief political reporter, Mike Dennison, break it down when we return.
We'll check in with them, but first let's check in with Bianna Goladriga to see what's coming up at 7 on CBS This Morning.
Good morning. Ahead on CBS This Morning, we're in the Florida facility where some of the 10 mail bombs may have been processed. Hear from an expert about what piece of evidence may provide a key clue about the suspect. And women voters tell us their #1 issues for the midterms and whether the country is moving in the right direction for their children's futures. All that and more is coming up. We'll see you at 7.